Hello again. These next series of presentations will be focused entirely on the receiver, because I want to be emphatic here. The receiver must be stopped. I'm going to give you detail of what he's done, what he's doing, and what he is attempting to do. This presentation will be entitled "The Receiver Flagged for Illegal Procedure." Now, I've already given you evidence of the deceit in which the receiver and his attorney has been engaged in, when in a previous presentation I described how they indicated to me and told me that they would not sell any of my equipment without getting permission from the court and letting me know so that I would have a chance to object and comment, knowing full well that when they made that indication to me, they had already sold at least 6 pieces of equipment. I also mentioned the fact that the receiver had at least a moral obligation, if not a legal obligation, when he knew that the attorney for Liberty Bell Bank misrepresented to the judge that I gave him an invalid passcode for the bank account. He knew that what I gave him, the code I gave him, was valid. He knew that he rendered it unusable because of something that he did, not because I gave him a wrong code. But yet, he sat silently before the judge and did not make it right. Now, as we know, attorneys are trained and capable of using our English language to manipulate the truth and the facts for the benefit of their clients. Now, so far, some focus has been given to the attorney for Liberty Bell Bank. I'm going to focus now on the attorney for the receiver, who, by the way, is also the attorney for my companies. And I'm still trying to come to grips with that. I vehemently objected when the receiver and Liberty Bell Bank's attorney proposed to the court that Mr. Doug Johnson, who represented the receiver at the time, now represents my company. Like, what's up with that? How can that happen? There is a definite conflict there, and we'll see that as we move through this. But I'm going to read to you, a statement that the attorney for the receiver, and again for my company, against my wishes, submitted to the court on a filing dated March 13th. As you know, I've been fighting with the receiver with regard to how they have devalued my assets. And Mr. Johnson, who is the attorney for the receiver, is trying to justify the receiver's position in downgrading the value of my equipment. And he writes, "The receiver and the receiver's counsel himself have repeatedly asked defendant Louis Rogers for supporting documentation and other factual support for his financial claims and projections for the LGR companies. He has consistently failed to offer any supporting documentation by which the receiver could substantiate his claims." That's what Mr. Johnson wrote to the court, that I have not offered any documentation supporting my claims. We will see. He also writes, in meetings with the receiver and the receiver's counsel, when probed about substantiating his financial allegations, the fact that his inventory is worth $7 million, he simply claimed that these are real numbers. Well, you will see that I did claim that these are real numbers, but I substantiated that, and they are real numbers. Now, Mr. Johnson ended his declaration to the court by stating, "I certify under penalty of perjury that the foregoing is true and correct." Now, when I present to you these next few reports that I also gave to the receiver and his counsel, you decide whether his statements are true and correct. Remember, he said I offered no documentation to substantiate my claims, and that I simply stated that these are real numbers. He made light in a condescending way that it was basically verbalized by me with no proof or documentation. To the contrary, on December 31st of 2014, I sent an email to the receiver, Mr. Martin Melman, copied Mr. Doug Johnson, his attorney, and also Pete Sigler, who is the holdover from when he worked for me, who is now working for the receiver. And in that email, I expressed some concerns I had. Among them was the devaluation of my company assets. Now, keep in mind, I sent this email to the receiver and his attorney December 31st, 2014, more than 60 days, more than 2 months prior to Mr. Johnson stating the fact that I had not given them any documentation substantiating my claims. In that email is a report, a lease receivable report, in which I questioned why he listed the lease receivables as only $3.5 million. I sent him a detailed report showing lease numbers, the lessee names, the addresses, zip codes, and the total of that report was over $6 million. And I said, admittedly, some of those receivables may be deemed as uncollectible. But I asked him if he had made any effort to reconcile the difference between the $3.5 million that he claimed was the lease receivable and the over $6 million that was calculated by my controller on a report that was run at the end of December of 2013. I acknowledged that he had shown a little over $1 million that they had collected. But still, there's a $2.5 million deficit here. Would you think that he would at least investigate that? But yet, they say I've given them no documentation. This is a report showing $6 million in receivable. I simply asked him to give me some sort of reconciliation of the difference. Secondly, going back to this declaration by Mr. Johnson, he mentions $7 million in value which Rogers ascribes to the cost per copy equipment, typically off-lease equipment, then leased to other smaller customers who pay only for the actual pages. First of all, he misrepresented that when he described it that way. Secondly, $7 million, no documentation. In that email I sent to Mr. Melman and Mr. Johnson 60 days prior is a report detailing lease number, lessee name, equipment description, phone number, date, residual, equipment cost, all the detail you could ask for, totaling $7 million. Yet he tells the court that I had offered no substantiation. This was sent to them in an email. He had it. Documentation. But there's more. There is also proof. When I said these are real numbers, again, he made light of the fact they are real numbers. This is an actual report of how we realized in many times over 200 and 300% of the book, the residual. He also has this report. It was sent to him listing, again, the lease number, the lessee, the original equipment cost, the renewal, all the detail. He had it, yet he tells the judge, and evidently was believed by the judge, that I offered no documentation in support of my claims. There's more. Also in that email, same email, another spreadsheet showing $98,000 per month generated from leases that have been extended and expired, but still generating revenue. That at one point, and again, this is simply a sample, $98,000 a month. There's more. Admittedly, I updated it because some of the equipment had since come back. And at the time, I said, this is a current number, and it shows $41,000 a month coming in at that particular time from off-lease equipment, from renewals. Many of those payments going to Liberty Bell Bank, going to other banks as well, but the majority going to Liberty Bell Bank, which, by the way, still has not given me an accounting of what they have done or are doing with those funds. So I asked the question, and you should ask the question as well. How can he make those statements to the court under penalty of perjury that I offered no documentation to substantiate my claims? He didn't say I offered it and they did not agree with it. He said I offered no documentation. There's more. There's equipment at 80 High Street that I don't have access to now because of the order of the court. And I showed how that could generate a net profit of $24,000 a month. This was sent to the receiver as well. University Copy Service, equipment there, off-lease equipment, part of my inventory. I showed how that could generate profit of $65,000 a month. There's detail of what our cost would be, our gross profit, our net profit, expenses, detailed information here. But yet he tells the court, I've given no documentation. Then there was a more informal report that I gave him as well, more conservative estimates that showed that I was willing to even donate or submit 80% of the profits back to the receiver to pay down the debt. And that portion that would go back to LGR, to the receiver to pay down the debt, was almost $40,000 a month. But yet, he tells the court, I have not given any documentation. You decide. What the receiver has been allowed to do has been a travesty. And quite honestly, appointing a receiver in the first place was a big mistake. And a bigger mistake was the appointment of Martin Mellman as the receiver. There's much more to come. Please don't let them continue down this path. They must be stopped for the good of me, my family, my company, and for the good of all of you out there who is interested in justice. Thank you.